The crack of metal hitting metal yanked me out of my Saturday morning coffee like a gunshot. I dropped my mug, bolted to the front window, and there she was, Tamra Zindle, queen of the HOA, standing over the twisted wreckage of my brand-new security gate. That gate was in violation of Section 4.2 of the Neighborhood Aesthetic Agreement, she shouted, holding up a clipboard like it was a weapon of divine law. I flung open the door. You rammed it with your SUV, Tamra. She didn't even blink. It was obstructing the community's visual harmony. The woman had plowed through my steel gate like it was made of cardboard, just to prove a point. She was standing in her tennis whites, not a hair out of place, like she'd just finished brunch with a state senator. Her massive SUV idled behind her, bumper crumpled, front grille hanging like a broken jaw. I'm Quentin Abrams. 45, single, work-from-home software engineer, and apparently the new target of my HOA president's crusade against individuality. I moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago because it was quiet, close to hiking trails, and looked like the kind of place where neighbors waved at each other without trying to control what color you painted your mailbox. I didn't realize I was moving into Tamra Zindle's fiefdom. She'd been on my case since day one. First, it was my trash cans being visible for 6 minutes past pickup. Then it was my yard lights being too modern. I ignored her. But the gate, well, that was my line in the sand. I'd installed it 2 weeks ago. A solid black steel swing gate with a keypad and camera. Not only for privacy, but because someone had been creeping around my front porch at night and I wasn't about to find out the hard way what they wanted. Now it lay in a twisted heap across my driveway and Tamra stood there like she'd done the neighborhood a favor. That's destruction of property, I said, walking toward her. You're paying for this. I represent the HOA, she said, as if that gave her diplomatic immunity. Your gate was unsanctioned. And I have the authority to remove non-compliant additions. Not with your car, you don't. She narrowed her eyes. You'll be receiving a fine for unauthorized installation, and another for obstructing pedestrian visibility. Maybe you'll think twice next time before breaking the rules. Then she turned, climbed into her now dented SUV, and drove off like she hadn't just committed a felony in broad daylight. I stood there, hands on my hips, heart pounding. My gate nearly $5,000 destroyed. And Tamra just drove away like it was part of her morning routine. I called the sheriff. They came out, took a report, and even reviewed my security footage. It clearly showed Tamra lining up her car and plowing through the gate like she was in a demolition derby. But after 2 hours and a lot of shoulder shrugging, the deputy told me there wasn't much they could do. She claims she was enforcing community regulations, and technically as HOA president, she has some leeway in disputes over property violations, he said. I stared at him like he'd grown another head. So, she can just destroy my property because she doesn't like it? He winced. No, but if she says it was an accident during an enforcement action, it gets murky. Honestly, these HOA cases get real messy. I offered to show him my HOA's bylaws. He declined, told me to take it up in civil court. Unbelievable, I muttered as he left. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the footage over and over, her smug expression before she hit the gas. That wasn't an accident. That was a message. And she wasn't just some meddling neighbor, she was using her HOA badge like a license to terrorize. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board. The response? A letter from Tamra herself. Your gate was unauthorized and in violation of Section 4.2. HOA policy allows for immediate removal of non-compliant structures. No apology. No mention of the damage. Just the fine, $300 for non-compliance. I wasn't going to fight her in court. Not yet. I needed something better. Something she wouldn't see coming. That's when I remembered the motion-activated sprinklers I'd used at my old place to keep deer out of the garden. They were strong, high-pressure, wide arc, and best of all, programmable. I still had them in my garage. Took me an hour to set them up. 2 hidden in the flower beds by the sidewalk, 1 tucked behind the mailbox. All aimed at the path Tamra took when she did her daily compliance walks. I calibrated them to target anything over 5 feet tall that moved within 10 feet. And I tested them. Oh, I tested them thoroughly. Those things hit like riot hoses. I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, at exactly 3:15, Tamra came marching up the sidewalk in her pastel cardigan, clipboard in hand. She paused in front of my house, probably ready to write me up for having a bird feeder that wasn't HOA approved. The moment she stepped into range, all 3 sprinklers fired. Whoosh! A blast of cold water nailed her from 3 angles. She shrieked and stumbled, flailing her arms as the jets soaked her head to toe. Her clipboard flew into my azaleas. She ran back down the sidewalk, sputtering and drenched, hair plastered to her forehead like a soaked poodle. I watched from behind the curtain, struggling not to burst out laughing. She didn't come back that day. Or the next. But on day 3, she returned with backup. 2 HOA board members, both looking uncomfortable, stood behind her as she pointed at my sprinklers like they were war crimes. "This is harassment," she shouted. "I demand you remove those immediately." I stepped outside, calm as ever. There for wildlife deterrence. Perfectly legal. And they're on my property. "You set them to target me." I shrugged. "They activate for anyone over 5 feet tall. Must be a coincidence." The board members looked at each other uneasily. One of them, a guy named Marcus, cleared his throat. "Tamra, maybe we should discuss this at the next meeting." Tamra scowled. "He's weaponizing irrigation." I grinned. "Or maybe I'm just protecting my visual harmony." She stormed off again, soaked and furious. And that's when I knew I'd hit a nerve. But what I didn't know yet was how far she'd go to retaliate. Because Tamra Zindle wasn't done. Not even close. The following Monday, the mail brought something I wasn't expecting: a certified letter with a return address from a law office I didn't recognize. Inside, a cease and desist order. Apparently, Tamra had decided to escalate her tantrum into legal theatrics. I read through it twice, then once more for the sheer absurdity. She was accusing me of creating hazardous conditions with intentional malice toward HOA personnel. Her attorney, some guy named Leonard Blevins, demanded the unlawful irrigation system be dismantled immediately or face civil action. The letter was riddled with legal fluff, but it didn't scare me. What did catch my attention was the return address. Blevins wasn't local. His firm operated out of a strip mall office in a neighboring county, specializing in small business disputes and, ironically, landlord evictions. Not HOA-related law. She'd hired a lawyer who barely passed the bar to send me a scare letter. Amateur hour. That night, I dug deeper. A few choice searches online and I found something better than I hoped. Leonard Blevins had been reprimanded twice by the state bar for filing frivolous lawsuits. I printed it all. Then I went back to the HOA bylaws and cross-referenced everything Tamra had thrown at me so far. Nothing in the fine print gave her, and certainly not her bumper, any right to damage private property, regardless of compliance status. But the real jackpot came when I started looking into Tamra's HOA presidency. Using the city's public records portal, I pulled the last 3 years of HOA meeting minutes and financial filings. They were supposed to be submitted quarterly. Only 2 existed for the past year, and both were missing required resident signatures. I kept digging. Tamra had been re-elected by uncontested appointment the last 2 cycles. No vote. No notice to residents. Just a single-page note in the community newsletter claiming she was retained by board consensus. And that board? 3 people. All neighbors on her street. All conveniently granted landscaping stipends and aesthetic exemptions. By the time I finished, my desk looked like a crime scene investigator's corkboard. Documents, printouts, highlighter marks, arrows pointing to forged signatures, and photos I'd taken of missing public notices from the community bulletin board. I didn't want payback. I wanted accountability. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Friday evening, held at the clubhouse near the community pool. I arrived 10 minutes early with a manila folder thick enough to choke a filing cabinet. A few neighbors were already scattered across the folding chairs, chatting about vinyl fences and tree roots. Tamra stood near the podium, lips tight, clipboard clutched like it held nuclear codes. "Mr. Abrams," she greeted me, eyes narrowing. "I trust you received our legal correspondence." "I did," I said, holding up the folder. "And I brought some of my own." Her smile was brittle. "This is a community meeting, not a courtroom. Then we should have nothing to hide, right?" The room quieted as more residents filtered in. I counted nearly 24 more than I'd ever seen at one of these things. Word must have gotten around. Tamra called the meeting to order, rattling off the agenda and skipping the usual pleasantries. She clearly wanted to keep things moving before I could speak. "Point 1, she said, tapping her clipboard, Unauthorized modifications and non-compliant installations remain an ongoing issue. We remind all residents that any additions to property exteriors must be submitted for approval. That includes fences, lights, and security gates. Point of order, I said, stepping forward. Since we're talking about compliance, can we discuss the lack of public notice for your reappointment last year? She blinked. That's not on the agenda. Neither was ramming my gate with a vehicle, but here we are. Gasps rippled through the room. A few people turned in their seats. One woman whispered something to her husband, who frowned. Tamra gripped the podium. Mr. Abrams, this is not the time for personal grievances. Then let's talk about communal ones, I said, pulling papers from my folder. This document here? It's the HOA's quarterly financial report. Or rather, the one that should have been filed in October but wasn't. According to state HOA regulations, failure to submit public financial disclosures within 90 days of the quarter's close is a violation. So is holding elections without posted notice, which you've done for 2 cycles. Murmurs erupted. Tamra's cheeks flushed. Also, I continued, holding up a blown-up photo. This is the community bulletin board outside the clubhouse. Taken last month. No notices posted. No election schedule. No agenda. And yet, somehow, you were reappointed unanimously by a board made up entirely of your immediate neighbors, 2 of whom received financial benefits in the last report. You're out of line, she snapped. No, Tamra, said Marcus, one of the board members from the sprinkler incident. He's raising valid concerns. She turned on him. This is a smear campaign. Then why are these documents accurate? I asked, passing copies to the front row. And why do 2 of the signatures on the last board meeting minutes belong to residents who moved out 8 months ago? The room went silent. Behind me, someone muttered, wait, what? It was over at that point. The illusion collapsed. Tamra stammered about miscommunications and clerical errors, but the damage was done. People started pulling out their phones, taking pictures of the documents I handed around. A few demanded a revote. One elderly man stood up and said he'd been trying to get a new mailbox approved for 6 months only to get denied 3 times, while Tamra's friend got a brick pillar installed without so much as a form. Someone called for a motion to suspend Tamra pending investigation. It passed unanimously. She tried to object, claiming procedural misconduct, but no one was listening. I left the meeting with my folder lighter and my steps a little faster. But I wasn't finished. The next day, I filed a formal complaint with the County Housing Authority and attached everything. Forged signatures, missing filings, selective enforcement patterns. It painted a clear picture. And I wasn't the only one. 6 other residents submitted statements by the end of the day. One even found an email trail showing Tamra had denied a solar panel request while approving one for her cousin 2 streets over. By Wednesday, the county compliance officer scheduled an on-site audit. Tamra's SUV was mysteriously absent from her driveway that morning. On Thursday, a patrol car arrived at her house. Not for a neighborhood check-in, this was serious. I watched from my porch as 2 officers knocked on her door, spoke for a few minutes, then escorted her to the vehicle. She wasn't handcuffed, but she didn't look pleased either. Later, I found out she was being investigated for misappropriating HOA funds. Apparently, one of the landscaping companies listed on the financials didn't exist. Payments had been made thousands of dollars, but the address listed matched a P.O. box registered under her maiden name. The sprinkler system? Still in place. Only now it had become a local legend. Someone even posted a video of Tamra getting drenched, captured from their Ring doorbell. It went viral on the neighborhood forum. The caption read, "When Tyranny Meets Irrigation." The new interim president of the HOA, a retired middle school principal named Lydia, stopped by to shake my hand. "I heard you're the one who got this started," she said. "You've got a good head for details. Ever consider joining the board?" I laughed. "I'm more of a behind-the-scenes guy." She smiled. "Well, if you ever change your mind, we could use someone who reads the fine print." I didn't answer right away. A hawk circled overhead, and somewhere down the block, a lawnmower buzzed to life. Things felt normal again. But even normal has room for justice. By the time the county audit wrapped up, the neighborhood had shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. For the first time since I moved in, people were knocking on each other's doors, not to complain, but to talk. Something about watching Tamra's carefully controlled empire unravel had reminded everyone that this was supposed to be a neighborhood, not a kingdom. I figured things would settle down after her removal. I'd already shifted focus back to my coding contracts and only checked the HOA forum out of habit. That's when a post caught my attention buried in a thread about drainage complaints. A woman named Elise from 2 streets over had uploaded a scanned invoice marked "Paid in Full" along with a note asking if anyone else had been double billed for pest control services. The invoice was addressed to the HOA, dated 3 months prior, and listed an amount nearly triple the market rate. The company? Sunridge Environmental Services. I'd never heard of it. Neither had Elise. But the kicker? The mailing address was identical to the one Tamra had used for the fake landscaping business. That's when the puzzle pieces started shifting again. Elise had been charged a supplemental HOA fee for community-wide pest control the previous quarter. So had I. So had everyone. The fee had been justified as a special addendum due to a surge in wasp nests near the clubhouse, but as far as I knew, no one had seen a single technician on their property. I messaged Elise to compare notes. Within 24 hours, she'd pulled together a half-dozen neighbors who'd all received similar bills. One guy, a firefighter named Joel, had even checked with real pest control companies. Not only had no one been contracted by our HOA, they hadn't even been called. That meant someone fabricated the invoices and pocketed the fees. I compiled everything: dates, amounts, addresses, and one very telling bank routing number on the Sunridge payment slip. I cross-referenced it with the earlier landscaping fraud and found the same account number. Elise and Joel brought it to Lydia, who wasted no time. 3 days later, the state's Department of Consumer Protection opened an investigation. But that wasn't the end of it. The real shock came when the forensic accountant assigned to the case discovered a second account connected to the HOA's operating funds and offshore transfer to a bank in the Cayman Islands. That wasn't just petty fraud. That was money laundering. I was sitting on my porch the morning the unmarked car pulled into Tamra's driveway. 2 men in tailored suits stepped out, flanked by local police. They weren't there for conversation. One of them carried a federal badge. The other carried a white box with a search warrant taped to the front. I watched through my binoculars. Didn't even pretend not to. Tamra answered the door in sunglasses and a silk robe. She tried to speak. One of the agents interrupted her and handed her the paper. She didn't resist. She didn't even argue. She stepped aside and they entered. Within an hour, they carried out 2 desktop towers, several hard drives, and 3 boxes of paper files. Tamra followed them out, jaw clenched, hands shaking. This time, they cuffed her. Her car wasn't in the driveway that night. Neither was her porch light. By the following week, the news had broken citywide. A local channel ran the story under the headline, "HOA President Arrested in $175,000 Fraud Scheme." Photos of her being led away in cuffs played under dramatic music. The anchor called it a stunning fall from power in one of the city's most tightly controlled neighborhoods. The article went national when someone leaked an internal email Tamra had sent to a board member. As long as they think it's about grass height and mailboxes, they'll never dig deeper. Well, we dug. And now she was facing multiple felony charges, including wire fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of public funds. But with Tamra finally out of the picture, the mess she left behind was ours to clean up. The HOA's accounts were frozen pending legal review. That meant no trash pickups, no landscaping, and no pool maintenance until the state-appointed trustee could sort it out. At first, people panicked. But then something strange happened. Joel offered to mow the community green for free. Elise's husband, who worked in sanitation, arranged a temporary trash collection deal with the city. I built a simple website where people could post neighborhood needs or volunteer offers. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. The community started operating like an actual community. Without Tamra's stranglehold, people remembered how to cooperate. One evening, Lydia stopped by again, this time with a bottle of wine and a clipboard of her own. "I'm drafting proposals for a temporary charter," she said, pouring us each a glass. "No more backdoor elections. Everything gets voted on, everyone has a say." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to deal with all that?" She smiled. "I taught 8th grade for 30 years. Drama doesn't scare me." We toasted to that. But there was one last thread still dangling, one I couldn't ignore. During the federal investigation, a single line item kept popping up in the financials. Security consultant, $4,200. It was listed 6 times over a 2-year period. The recipient, a firm called GateSafe Solutions. I called their listed number. Disconnected. After some digging, I discovered GateSafe had never been licensed as a security contractor. In fact, it wasn't registered with the state at all. But the address on the invoices led to a storage unit facility 3 towns over. I took a drive. The manager was reluctant, but I showed him a copy of the invoice and told him the unit number. He checked his records. The unit had been rented under a fake name, but the payment method matched the same bank account used in the landscaping scam. He agreed to let the authorities know. But before I left, he gave me a copy of the security log. That's when I saw it, an entry from 2 months ago. A man named Brent Zindle had accessed the unit late at night. Same last name. Same address as Tamra's prior residence. Her brother. I passed everything to the state investigator. Within a week, a second arrest was made. Brent had been running a fake security company used to siphon HOA funds while posing as a compliance contractor. He'd been the one installing phony cameras, crafting bogus reports, and even issuing fines Tamra signed off on. The storage unit, once searched, turned up old paperwork, signed violation notices, templates, and a dozen stamped envelopes addressed to residents. All dated but never mailed. Tamra had been manufacturing violations from her living room, and Brent had been cashing the checks. The judge denied both of them bail. At the next community meeting, Lydia stood beside the newly elected interim board on the clubhouse stage. No podium this time. Just folding chairs and open faces. "We're not here to lecture," she said. "We're here to listen." People stepped up one at a time. Some apologized for staying quiet too long. Others voiced anger about being treated like criminals for minor infractions. But by the end, someone suggested something unexpected: dissolve the HOA altogether. It started as a murmur but gained traction. A retired lawyer in the audience explained the process: legal, lengthy, but possible. The community had to vote. 75% approval required. That night, I went home and added a referendum page to the neighborhood site. By morning, over 100 signatures had poured in. Within the week, enough residents had signed the petition to initiate the formal process. And just like that, the gears began turning. It would take months to finalize, but we were on the path. No more HOA. No more unchecked power. Just people, neighbors, and shared space. A month later, I replaced my ruined gate not with steel, but with something better. A simple wooden archway lined with climbing jasmine. No keypad. No camera. Just open air and a path that welcomed rather than warned. Somewhere across town, Tamra was awaiting trial. Her brother too. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't care what they were doing. They were out of our lives. What mattered was this: we didn't just stop a tyrant. We rebuilt the neighborhood she tried to control. And we made damn sure no one could ever do it again. The neighborhood's transformation wasn't just cosmetic, it was structural. With the HOA board dismantled, the fraudulent finances frozen, and the dissolution process underway, people began rediscovering the freedom of living without a leash around their front lawns. For the first time, porch swings reappeared, wind chimes rang freely, and one guy even painted his front door turquoise without fearing a visit from clipboard patrol. But underneath the surface, something larger was still unfolding, something that made destroying a gate look like a warm-up act. It started with a knock. Not the kind that comes from a neighbor holding a pie or a city official holding a clipboard. This one was urgent, deliberate, and backed by a badge. I opened the door to find 2 men, plain clothes, no nonsense. One of them held up identification: Special Agent Roland Sharp, Department of Justice. He didn't waste time. "We need to ask you a few questions about Tamra Zindle's activities during her tenure as HOA president," he said. "Particularly regarding private surveillance and unauthorized data collection." I stepped aside to let them in, already feeling the familiar thrum in my chest, the one that told me something big was about to drop. Agent Sharp set a folder on my kitchen table and opened it to reveal photographs. Not just of Tamra or her brother Brent, but of several pieces of equipment I didn't recognize: small black boxes with antennae installed behind utility panels on street lights. "These were found in 5 different areas of the neighborhood," he said. "We believe they were used to intercept wireless feeds from residents' home security systems, including doorbell cameras, gate sensors, and in some cases, interior devices." I stared at the photos. "She was spying on us?" "Not just spying," said the second agent, a younger woman named Agent Quan. "She was collecting footage, storing it off-site, and in some cases, editing clips to fabricate violations." Agent Sharp added, We recovered footage that was used to issue fines, deny appeals, and in at least one case, report a neighbor to Child Protective Services. All based on doctored video. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the scope of it all. How did no one catch this? She was careful, said Agent Kwan. Until the storage unit was seized, we had no idea how deep it went. Dozens of residents were affected. Private conversations, footage from inside homes, she collected it all. Agent Sharp slid another photo forward, a server rack housed in what looked like a basement. This was in a second property she owned under a shell company. She stored everything there, organized by address. I couldn't help but ask, why? What was the point? Agent Kwan answered without hesitation. Control. She used the information to manipulate board members, silence anyone who questioned her, and eliminate opposition. We believe she blackmailed at least 3 people into resigning from the board over the past 4 years. That landed like a hammer. Can you testify to the events that led to her initial exposure? Sharp asked. The gate, the sprinklers, the financial documents? I nodded. All of it. I've still got the footage and records. We'll issue a subpoena for the originals, Kwan said. And we'll need your statement. I gave it to them right there at the table. They asked precise questions, dates, times, who I spoke to, what I saw. When I told them about her ramming my gate, Sharp raised an eyebrow. That was never in her incident report, he said. No surprise there, I replied. Her version probably said I charged her with a rake. They stayed for a little over an hour, then left with a copy of my files and a promise to keep me in the loop. I watched their car disappear down the hill, the weight of what I just learned settling in. This wasn't just an HOA gone rogue. This was a long-term operation built on surveillance, manipulation, and outright psychological warfare. And it was only now being unraveled. The next time I saw Tamra, it wasn't in person, it was on the evening news. A new indictment had been filed federal this time. Charges included wiretapping, unlawful surveillance, falsifying government reports, and obstruction of justice. The anchor stated clearly the Department of Justice had evidence she'd used intercepted footage to file false police reports against residents she viewed as non-compliant, including one that nearly triggered a custody battle. The footage they showed blurred faces, but the voice was unmistakable hers, narrating a fabricated incident to police while showing strategically clipped footage. The full version recovered from her server showed exactly the opposite. The community was stunned. Even the holdouts who had defended her tough love approach went quiet. Her defenders vanished like mist. At the next interim community forum, no longer called an HOA meeting, Lydia stood under the community pavilion with a stack of printed updates. The federal charges have been filed, she said, and a class action lawsuit is being prepared. We've been contacted by a legal firm specializing in data privacy violations. If you were affected, you'll be contacted. Someone in the crowd asked if Tamra was facing jail time. Lydia didn't flinch. The charges carry a combined sentence of up to 80 years. Given the evidence, a plea deal is unlikely. The crowd murmured, not in fear or outrage this time, but in shared vindication. Elise stepped forward, holding a folder of her own. I've been working with a few neighbors to start a community co-op. We're proposing a voluntary fund for shared services, trash pickup, landscaping, snow removal, but with full transparency. No board, no fines, just neighbors contributing what they can. People clapped. Not out of politeness, this was real support. A new structure was emerging, built not on control but cooperation. The kind of thing no HOA manual could ever blueprint. After the meeting, Joel caught up with me near the parking lot. They're calling you the guy who cracked the case, he said. Not bad for someone who just wanted a gate. I wanted peace and quiet, I said. Didn't expect to trigger a federal investigation. He grinned. Well, your peace and quiet saved the rest of us. The class action suit moved quickly. Once the DOJ released the server contents to the legal team, dozens of residents joined. The footage showed just how deeply Tamra had infiltrated the neighborhood's privacy. She'd even recorded HOA board meetings that were supposed to be private conversations, using the recordings to coerce votes that kept her in power. The judge fast-tracked the case, citing exceptional public interest. When the verdict came down, it was historic. Tamra was sentenced to 32 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Her brother Brent received 16 for his role in the financial fraud and surveillance setup. The court ordered restitution to the community, funded by the seizure of their assets including Tamra's second home, her SUV, and every cent from the offshore accounts. Every resident named in the suit received compensation, and the funds were used to completely renovate the community clubhouse, repair neglected infrastructure, and establish a small endowment to support future neighborhood projects. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome came quietly. A month after the sentencing, the city approved the final paperwork to dissolve the HOA. It was over. For good. The neighborhood began to breathe again. Without the constant pressure of regulation and fear, it became what it was always meant to be, a place to live, not a place to obey. I dug up the sprinkler system not out of necessity, but because I didn't need it anymore. Instead, I turned the flower beds into a pollinator garden. Bees, butterflies, even the occasional hummingbird. Life buzzing where paranoia once ruled. The gate was never replaced. The jasmine arch grew thick, its vines curling around the wood like fingers gripping freedom. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned soft, Lydia walked by and paused at the edge of my driveway. "You started something good here," she said. "You didn't just stop her. You gave people their neighborhood back." "I didn't do it alone," I said, watching the butterflies dance between the blossoms. "No," she agreed. "But you were the first one who said no and didn't flinch." She walked on, and I stood there for a long time, breathing in the scent of jasmine and the sound of nothing but wind through trees. No gate, no clipboard, no HOA, just home.